Hello all, this is Aki from Bring Forth, and this is set 31 part 1. I will post this in two places in the Bring Forth forum. One is in my own podcast and one is in the thread of how to reconcile Islamic immigration with the law of one. And this is a topic where I believe that I should at least contribute to the discussion. The Islamic immigrants are perhaps 20-30% of them are violent, and they will continue to be violent. They are soldiers who have put on civilian clothes and fled into the other world. They are people who have fought and are now losing. Most of them belong to ISIS or other similar terrorist organizations. And as soon as the population settles and we show our preference for the peaceful ones in a way that is actually provable, that matters to the people will lynch the soldiers. But that is something we have thus far been not willing to do. We haven't been willing to show the peaceful part of the population what will happen if the total population doesn't stay peaceful. So the situation is one where the former soldiers are able to cajole the population into being a hiding place for them, and they are able to hide and basically commit all kinds of crimes in our society. And this is causing a huge tension between the major population and the immigrant population, and there is no real fast way to solve this. It will take hundreds of years to get the population to really talk with one another, but as long as there is a reasonable chance that a violent person can put on civilian clothes and hide and go to another society and hide their actions, then there will be no peace. We have to separate by hand, if necessary, one by one, the people who were soldiers from the people who weren't soldiers, and deport one of those groups. It's in science fiction often called indoctrination, that when a public encounters a group that used to be soldiers, they have difficulty believing how far the soldier will actually go to betray his new society to get benefits for the old society, because the civilian public has difficulty understanding how violent a soldier need be. So they don't really get that the current Islamic population is at war with itself. It's undergoing a civil war, almost planet-wide, where it is trying to go through a reform period similar to what the Europeans had with the Renaissance, and they are, for the most part, in the right smack in the middle of the wars and fleeing to Europe like Europeans fled to America. So you have to understand what you are seeing here. If we don't take a strong, deliberate stand to be with the peaceful immigrants who are actually not the soldiers, then the soldier immigrants will keep pushing us until we have to declare war on the entire ethnicity. That will be the end of both groups in Europe. The reality is that we are not under a military threat here. Our military technology is 50 to 150 years more advanced than the Islamic one, so we're not under a military threat. We're under a guerrilla threat in that our populations mix together and the violence seems to be towards the individual peoples, and the rate of ethnically motivated crimes towards whites are 3 to a lot more than 3 times more likely than ethnic violence towards the immigrants that's racially motivated, not just violence itself. That means that the immigrants are actually racist and they are actually hostile to the native population. And this is something that happens to some of the immigrants, but not all of them. Like I said, there's about 20-30% of the immigrants that are just violent. Now the problem here is that if the situation develops into an open war, there will be nothing in the Arab world even close to European bioweapons. And this is something that they understand. If it actually spirals out of control and becomes a real war, the Arab nations will lose like they've never lost before. But we will lose the European dream at the same time. So that's something we would prefer not to undergo through. So we will take a lot of shit and then still try to hold it together. But eventually this is not the case. So how to reconcile this with the law of one? It's quite simple. You have to have the filters available to filter out the population that is hostile from the population that isn't hostile. You have to understand that any population is made up of individuals, and some of them will try to continue the war that they lost in their own country by having a presence here that they can use against mostly their own population to keep the war going here. They aren't really all that interested in taking over these countries because they really don't have the technical ability to run these regions. So they are interested in continuing the war by having their own population that is now living in this country pressured the same way as it was in the home country during the war. So these people are trying to continue the war in a new country, and some of the immigrants who actually fled from the war and want nothing to do with the war are in the middle. They are getting stuck, but they don't have the weapons here like they didn't have the weapons there to fight the enemy. So we should fight it for them. We should separate the violent immigrants and deport them immediately, or even if necessary actually use death penalty on them. This is something we need to do. We need to understand that most of these immigrants are good people that want to integrate and are really welcome here, but there is a sizable minority that we must engage with the means of our armies of light. So anyway, that's all about this, and I'd like to point out that in Finland the Islamic community arrived in the 18th century. That's 200 years ago to 300 years ago, when Russia originally invaded Sweden and took Finland from them. So the Islamic community in Finland is very long history and has very well adapted to the country. They've been involved in every war we've had. They've sent volunteers every time, and they haven't tried to hide from our responsibilities, and they've been paying taxes, and their crime rate is the same as the common population, and so on and so on and so on. So this isn't about Islamic populations in specific. They at times integrate very well into the community. This is about a massive influx of people from war zone that can for themselves separate the former soldiers from the community. So these former soldiers are trying to continue the war over here that they lost over there, and this has nothing to do with Islam. It has to do with the fact that we can't separate the former soldiers from the immigrants, and this is causing problems. We need to be very hard on people who we realize have actually been in the war, because their tendency to continue the war over here is immense, even if it means that they were involuntary and they were just drafted. It is still someone we have to be very hard on because of the situation. So anyway, that's the gist of it. These immigrants are for the most part welcome, but a lot of them are from communities where the war was such that they can't really hide from it over here, and we have to create them safe shelters for that, and the only way to do that is to basically deport the guys who were the former soldiers. That is all.